back, I should say, but I think welcome to this campus today. Where I'm also new here, I've never been here. It's a beautiful campus. Thanks to Kinuraj and Michal and my friend Dani, I'm here. So I'm delighted. My name is Hira Bantiwari. I teach in Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Once you say JNU, nothing much need to be said. Still, I was to my deficiencies, but I'm a Sanskritist basically, so I've studied Sanskrit. Um, Several of my degrees, when I say several, I have 8 of them, so are in Sanskrit and a couple of them in philosophy. So I straddle these worlds, and I'm interested in literature. So welcome all of you to this one, a very beautiful conference. When I say beautiful, I mean it in the sense that, and I'm unashamedly liberal Zionist. So and when I say liberal Zionist, I have Isaiah Berlin in mind, what he meant by that. So Israel is very close to my heart. I had the opportunity to spend a year there, so I feel rather fulfilled. And I keep saying to myself, next year in Jerusalem. But whether it happens or not anymore, I'm, as I said, fulfilled. I have prayed at the Western Wall Hapatel more times than many of you, perhaps, but because I used to take a walk from my office to my home where I was living almost every day via that place, unless I was too tired or too late or too early. So, but anyways, to get back to the system of the day, and his brother David, who was looking after the family on whom he depended for his living being and the entire family, and we don't need any definition. The name Maimonides itself somehow flowers in our heart something which is so unimaginable in one life by one person. His 2 major works, among many, are famous, Mishneh Torah and the Guide to the Perplexed. But what I also managed to read, where I gleaned his interest in India, was in 2 ways. He was, as you know, being asked, sent letters from across the Arab world and perhaps far beyond. He was fascinated by Aristotle, so he would always try and judge everybody on the basis of that. So one of the letters that he is responding to, which was related to some problems in Arabic, I don't know the language, so I should be rather careful, nor do I know Hebrew. I have read a lot of translations of that. He responds to that person from, I think from Morocco or some other place, or maybe somebody who was visiting him in Egypt, saying that there is a language, great language in India. He uses, of course, typical word Sanskrit, and then he says Pali, which of course would be very close to being famous because of the Buddha. In which, and then he goes on to give a philological interpretation of the problem that was asked in the question. After reading this, I read another lamentation of his about his brother. His brother was a businessman, so he had been encouraging his brother David to do trade between the port of Egypt and other places. But David discovered that his friends and co-businessmen were traveling far away and making a lot of money. And he discovered that lots of boatmen and businessmen going on ship to India and getting a lot of good things, including diamonds and silks and whatnot. So he told Maimonides, and I'm of course explaining it, it's very precise. Maimonides writes such a precise language that I have read about him. He says, trying to dissuade his brother not to go that far. Nevertheless, David went and never returned. So it is commonly known that in 1169 this incident happened, and David never returned. When you read that letter, you almost cry, at least I did, in English, even in English translations. What would it be in Arabic? I don't know how he would wrote. He felt guilty that because of him and other family members, David had to take such arduous and dangerous journey to India. But it is in this context that I wish he had reached India, then I would get some news of him. So here, of course, the two sides of this great man, I call him the Shankara of Judaism. Whatever I have read, and forgive me my deficiencies of Jewish philosophy, this is what interests me in. And since then, I have devoured many volumes and articles about and on Maimonides. Of course, the most famous one to me, which I'm always thrilled to reread, is Moshe Halbertal's, which is Harambam in originally, and now, of course, Maimonides, his life and philosophy. So this is one similarity, that India and Israel have had this kind of affinity, direct and indirect. But then there are direct contacts. So let me get back to 19th century, 20th century. There is a book edited by another great Indianist in Israel, David Shulman. He has edited a book in 2008 called Karmic Passage. He was trying to draw some inspirations of those books which have been written, the Passage to India or whatever it is. And there he delineates and explains, and many other scholars who have contributed to that volume, this is an anthology, what kind of work that Israelis, well before, in late 19th century, early 20th century, have been working in various fields. The only disappointment for me in that book was that I was looking for something very serious work. So most of the scholars were interested in what we call snake charming, tantras, and so that goes on even now, but that's a different matter altogether. But nevertheless, there was this passion to know about India, and there's some sort of India and its civilization, its philosophy beckoned Israeli scholars, and that I can say is because of the philosophical training or moorings of a Jewish scholar into the Judaic philosophy. That could be one reason. Could be many other reasons. Then, of course, you have very famous dialogue. I won't mention the famous one between Gandhi and Einstein, but of course between Einstein and Tagore. And Einstein has written a small book on Tagore also. So lots of, and the conversations, of course, between Tagore and Einstein will be of spiritual in nature, and of course more philosophical than political in that context. Gandhi's was politico-spiritual, a very clever way of trying to suggest. And then you go back in history, in the medieval history, a lot of scholars who traveled from Persia to India, they brought with them. One more thing that Maimonides mentions, which excited me, was we have a very famous book in India in Sanskrit, which is called Panchatantra, a collection of beautiful stories of how to live a life in India. This was first translated in the 7th century, 680, I believe, or maybe around that time, in a language called Pahlavi, which is a sister language to Old Persian language. The language which is spoken around the border of Afghanistan and modern Afghanistan and modern Iran. And then it gets filtered through into the Arab world. When you pick up an Arabian tale, and the translation was called, what is it called? Khalila Wadimna. They're the two characters, animal characters. So the stories in Panchatantra are told through animal world. So the animals are having a conversation, and they are giving knowledge to humans how to live a life, which is another trait in India or ancient India. So these stories then got into the Arabian tales, and I dare say most of the striking trails and from Arabian tales, Arabian Nights and other places, are more or less mirrors or copies or translations of that. And there's a lot of work that has been done. From 14th century onwards, there's a huge amount of work that has been done. As I said, I keep shifting between 20th century and back. But in modern time, there are a lot of, as I said, David Schulman, his colleagues in Hebrew University. My dear friend Dani Rabe, who is sitting here, will be presenting a paper here. He has spent over 25 years of his life dedicated to studying India, ancient India, Indian philosophy, particularly yoga philosophy and also Vedanta philosophy. Lately, I'm glad to say he has started looking at the modern soft philosophy, if you like, what I call soft philosophy, in the sense that film, which is one of the badges of India that we see across the world. So he compares Indian philosophical thoughts with certain films, certain episodes. And the other scholar who is also presenting a paper, Michal Elrich, is also working in the area, and I'm glad to know that you are doing not only the ritual practices and ethnography, but also interested in philology and philosophy. Philology has been one of the major areas where Israeli scholars, whether in Israel or in Europe, but largely in America, have been working. So as I said, David Sulman, Igal Brona, Professor Greenspan, and Professor Daniel Rave, many of them in the 20th century have been working and studying India and making us read afresh. The similarities also go into one very trivial aspect I would mention. If you consider looking at India or studying India by a foreigner, particularly in this context, by a Jew, would be the religion itself, which has come to be known as Hinduism. It begins from Vedism, Brahmanism, and now, of course, popularly known as Hinduism from the 4th century AD onwards, more importantly, is that these two religions are not proselytizing religions. I was told, later on I was corrected that no, you can't be a Hindu, you can't convert into Hinduism, you can practice it. The same, I think, was the case with Judaism at some point in history for various reasons, and we know the conversion or reconversion, whatever you like to call it, has happened. So these are two, so in other words, these are not the religions, and the difference immediately, let me point out, is that Judaism is a religion of a wonderful book, while there is no one book in Hinduism. So that's a straightforward difference there. Another thing is that idolatry is an inherent aspect of Hinduism. And I'm using idolatry not in an academic sense here, but let's say the idol worship. And that takes back to my favorite topic of imagination and the isolation of the self. If we did not have images, if we did not have idols, if we did not have certain figures and pictures, it would be more difficult to drive back into memory, to delve into memory. So this image and idol works as a detonator to the flood of knowledge that is stored through that. So in various ways, in various times in India, this has been celebrated, that you need some sort of, which these days is called symbolism. Even any mark, any sign, even a kippah to me is referring to something which goes back past for thousands of years. But in a real sense, of course, imagination in the sense that the philosophers thought that it would be better, just like words remind us of so much knowledge that is contained not only in the word, but the word where it has been used, the text, the passage, the page, the bibliography. Similarly, the images remind us of certain journey, intellectual journey into the past, but for many, it is also a spiritual and religious journey per se. So simply treating the image as the deity or God or something to be worshipped. So this is another, as I said, difference and similarities. So what I'm trying to say in the history of imagination, in the history of, and imagination in Sanskrit is called kalpana, the root is klip, from which becomes kalpana, where you somehow capture. And you cannot capture without meditation, without rumination. Therefore, imagination is straight away connected to rumination, to thinking. And thinking therefore becomes a thought therefore becomes a philosophy, a book, if you like. So, memory and memorializing is directly connected to imagination, kalpana. And when we read and study and see memory, and I'm deliberately, as I said, I was told that by 11 o'clock you might get more audience, but I'll shut up very quickly. As I said, I found the opportunity so the memory therefore is connected not only to imagination, but it also is connected to the entire bunch of things which are part of our intellectual heritage, be they religious practices, philosophical practices, or even social practices, which are so sundry and trivial that we may not be able to recall. But the only problem with memory, therefore, is that it is considered unscientific. Although it is sine qua non for our existence, but it is unscientific because when you're recalling, many of the things in the original incident might have been lost when you're recalling, and many could be added. So it's in a way, it's a corrupted form. Therefore, with the memory, you also need a text. So the textualization has to be extremely important. In ancient India, memory was something which was celebrated for centuries, for whatever the reasons, for the lack of resources, for the lack of interest, or for even religious or spiritual reasons. Writing down was not celebrated, but memorizing was celebrated. And so much so that in the 4th century BC, Plato has said, there was a tradition in Athens that until the 4th century, even after that perhaps, anybody who could recite Homer from his memory without fluff or fault will be given a national prize, like a Nobel Prize. In the 4th century BC, Plato says it is a melancholic feeling that people have these days begun to write down Homer. Of course, you write, of course, you compose, but writing down something which is visible. Now, when you go to certain religious practices, there is a problem in that. There is a God who is dictating things. And I sometimes wonder if people had, if the God trusted men other than gods. I call them other than gods, which is called Devetara in Sanskrit. Not God, but of course it could be the negative aspects as well. If he trusted the memory of the people, probably he will not insist on writing down. But that's a separate matter altogether. But in India, for whatever the reasons, for thousands of years, it was, and so memory therefore becomes a tradition in itself, where you need a group of people, dedicated, devoted people. And when you say devoted, then almost certain amount of religiosity creeps in to be able to preserve the text as purely as possible. So the purity in memory is the third aspect that I'm adding to, where you can have a collective memory, you can have an individual memory, and you can have an institutional memory. So when the Vedas, sometime before 2000 BC, were composed or written, they were not written down, we are told, and for a very long time they were kept alive, not only alive, were being practiced through human memory, of course. And therefore there is a tradition even today which we study, that every verse, every syllable has to be pronounced in a particular way. One of the reasons for philologists like me is that if you articulate things correctly, then they shall not be misunderstood. Therefore, there was a very strict manner of training a person to contain that literature, in this case, Vedas, the Vedic Samhitas, so that it can be passed on, and articulation therefore becomes a most important part of this. So these differences and similarities, I keep saying, are a sort of appropriation and rejection of a human life. This is what happens in imagination. You appropriate certain things and reject at once what is not good. This is what keeps alive the inter-religious studies or interdiscipline studies. Some of us feel that no, we must do it thoroughly. If it is not within our area, we shouldn't touch it. Others simply say that there's something which appeals to us. So it's not only the modern scholars, but of course another, I'll end here, another famous Israeli, Martin Buber, who was fascinated by Indian philosophy of self or Vedanta as it is known, the isolation of the self, or trying to discover where life is. So in this context, I'm delighted therefore to introduce these three speakers who will be talking in three different areas, their expertise, in which of course I am not an expert. So the first paper will be by Professor Ghani Parchiak. I hope I have pronounced your name correctly. I don't know.
No, but I'm used to it.
No, but what is the correct name?
Parchak.
Parchak. Okay. I apologize. Ghani Parchak, who teaches at the Department of East Asian Studies at Tel Aviv University. Her research interests include vernacular religion in South Asian, visual media and popular culture. One thing which combines, somehow joins the three speakers is that now at least all three are interested in visual media as well. But of course, I am a student of text and philology. The second, as I said, Dani Rabe, who has written a huge amount of work, especially his two major books in yoga are seminal, as far as I could see, and many papers. Recently has come out with a fascinating article trying to dissect a movie scenes. Unfortunately, Dani, I have read your paper but not the movie. I haven't watched the movie, so I really can't capture that much, but yes, I could see what you're trying to say there. Dani is an expert in yoga philosophy, but Vedanta philosophy as well, and lately we have been somehow fighting over logic. We have another shared interest together. We have supervised a thesis in Tel Aviv University, which is on Indian logic, so which was a very good experience. And the third speaker is Michal Ehrlich. She's a budding, wonderful scholar. I didn't meet her until yesterday, but I knew of her because I knew Kenuraj, who is an old friend for last 12, 13 years maybe, or maybe not that long. I'm very old, so let me tell you. So without taking any further time, I apologize to all my speakers. Let me have this great pleasure of us asking Dr. Konyak to deliver the talk. Thank you. I'm sorry for taking that long. Yeah. This one. Yeah, there is an additional one here. Oh, shall I switch it on?
Can you hear me? Yes. Good morning, and I would like to thank
Hiraman.
I would like to thank our colleague, Professor Hiraman Tiwari, first and foremost. And then I would like to thank our colleagues from Jindal, OP Jindal Global University, and our dear colleagues from Tel Aviv University for putting up this conference, part of ongoing deepening and widening relations between Israeli and Indian academias, which I am very proud to be part of. I will talk, my talk is entitled Between Jerusalem and Home, Judaism and Hinduism. In the literary work of Bnei Israel writers. And I shall start with the quote. The year is 1975. Mumbai's airport is crowded with people. Sitting on one of the benches, I gazed at the passengers. Some were dressed formally and some casually. All, as it seemed to me.
The microwave. No, just you need the middle one, just press it. Oh.
Make it a little prolonged touch in the middle.
I very much like your paper on the in-betweeners, Rory, so thank you so much. By the way, Dan's paper also is about in-betweenness. I know little about Jewish experiences here in India, and therefore my questions have little to do with India. I've been doing some work about Jewish experiences in other parts of the world. Normally I prefer to avoid the use of the term or concept of community. Supposedly the term community refers to a well-defined group of people. Many Jews are unaffiliated Jews, and in a way it limits your discussion. I would talk about Jews and Jewish experiences without talking about communities, but that's from my own research experiences. I would avoid the term assimilation in my own work and talk about integration, social integration and the like. There is an ideological bias to the term assimilation. You are somewhat inconsistent in the use of the terms Indian Jews or Jewish Indians. and it makes a difference. And especially when one talks about Bnei Israel, it seems that, to me, that Jewish Indians might be more, I don't know. It's up
the
to
name of the community.
Yeah. It might be more appropriate. And you asked about whether it's India or Israel, the fatherland. I have an article published with the title Motherlands of Choice. Alien is motherland, but I don't know why. I'm not sure why exactly. And then there's, unlike a biological mother, there might be more than one mother. So, and one could make a decision at a certain point, take a different decision at another point, and have two motherlands simultaneously. So,
Yes.
Just a couple of remarks.
Thank you so much. Yes, of course. So thank you so much for your of multiple belonging as quite a natural cultural formation that occurs everywhere. However, I cannot. These are defined by the authors themselves, and they see it in a quite a, I wouldn't say binary way, but the question of binary is very much present. However, it is not answered because it cannot be answered, and this, of course, is a sort of an answer to you. Yes, as readers, of course, we can say yes. We cannot speak even in boundaries, or boundaries have melted. But within such a short presentation, I have first and foremost to delineate the basic infrastructure. And about fatherland and motherland, it is a very interesting point, as this is in a way a reaction to some core ideology lying at the basis of Hindu nationalism. Okay, that India is both motherland, okay, the entity that have given life to us, nourishes us. Every mother is in that sense a goddess, in many other senses as well. And fatherland, okay, in terms of, I read the sociological reading, so this is the aspect of law and order, authority, etc., etc., etc. So India, in its own national discourses, defines itself as both a fatherland and a motherland, and Indian Bnei Israel Jews have taken it, and have in a way relocated it within their multi-belonged identity. Okay, so India is the motherland and Israel is the fatherland, thereby expressing their commitment to Jewish tradition with its rigid orthodox mindset. Okay, they have to correspond to it. They have to, because they are always suspected as not being Jewish enough, and we all know the stories. So, okay.
Okay. Yeah, please. Yeah.
Three short pointed questions. One is, are there...
Use the microphone or you take the
Okay, yeah. There are three short pointed questions. The first question is, are there any Indian Jewish writers publishing in the Hebrew language?
Yes.
The second question is...
So that is answered.
Okay. Then I would like to know about those
Sure.
writers.
Yes, I am.
And has the interest in Chakdana
Yes.
been confined to the scholarly world, or has it generated interest also among the general Hebrew readership? And the third question is that are these writers, Indian writers, who are published in this
Yes.
collection of stories, Chakdana, do they come across lamenting the potential end of Jewish life in India?
The last question is the most difficult of them, I think. Yes. The answer is yes. Okay, so let's make it short. Okay, one more thing that I wanted to tell you is that Esther David, the one that I was talking about, and this relates also to your question, she wears a bindi, okay, marking the body as a Hindu. Well, it doesn't necessarily so, but mostly red. So writing on her body, okay, this identity of multi-belonging. Anyway, yes, of course, Indian writers in Hebrew. Yes, the collection that I've mentioned, Ichikidana, Breaking the Silence, using part of the Sri Charles Obis, yes, hit, yes, of course, that has become a symbol of Indian cinema and India as a whole. It has become a symbol, a rather degrading one, I would say, and this is a use of the.
Not necessarily. Everything Argentine all over the world.
Oh, really?
In the 80s, especially when you said you were from Argentina, the taxi driver would say, Maradona. In this case,
but this is football.
But in the conference we had in Mumbai earlier this week, the head of the research institute of the Bombay Stock Exchange told about his visit to Israel, to camp in Jerusalem. The driver asked him, where are you from? He said, India. And the driver said, Chikidana.
Yes.
So it's not necessarily in a negative way.
I had the same experience.
Okay. I'm surprised.
Okay.
And in fact, the driver sang the whole song, and I sang along with him. I was visiting Ain Gedi, and on the way back, I just sang shamelessly aloud. Yeah.
Okay. So this collection, Chikdana, Breaking the Silence, is a pioneering collection of short stories by first and third generation of Indian Jews. As I told you, the stories, part of them were narrated orally in Marathi or Hindi and translated into Hebrew.
Not Gujarati?
No. No. And now another collection is about to appear. It's entitled Mother India, Father Israel. Apart from this, there's an Indian Jewish writer named Sophie Yehuda that lives for centuries, I think, not centuries, for decades in Israel. Yes, she has published a novel entitled Dropped from Heaven by Random House, and never managed to publish her work in Hebrew. She's a quite well-known writer. Eventually, she had published it, by herself with no distribution systems. So she remains quite unknown, although she is quite known, in global terms. Other literature has been written in Marathi, the Bnei Israel community issues a periodical entitled My Bully. It was
Noach Masel.
yes, now Noach Masel, Flora Samuel was the editor.
Gulu Ezekiel is also part of this.
Um,
Not aware of it, yeah.
Apart from this, as far as I know, there are no other literary work by Bnei Israel community.
In the Hebrew language.
In the Hebrew language, yes. I think part of the reason is that the stronger part of the community sort of alienated itself from the elite, okay, alienated itself from its Indian origin. I have one acquaintance. This doesn't prove anything, of course, but she says, I'm an Indian, and that means I'm not a Jew of Mizrahi origin. Okay, she resents this, the play of, or being part of the play of identity politics in Israel. Other parts remained very much in the margins of society, and Ichigidana breaking the silence, as well as Father India, Mother India, Father Israel, is the literary fruit of this, let's say, sector. Okay, that is very much part of trying to reverse the balance of power within Israeli society.
Thank you. Yes, Kinraj, you have anybody else? Just yeah. Okay. So yours will be the last one now. Yeah. No, let Kinraj say.
I had a similar comment about Ichik Dana, but I think my first encounter in 2012 was the same. As a fieldwork student, I was waiting at the
Yes.
Jerusalem Central bus station. A 60-year-old woman just walked towards the station. She sat next to me, and after a minute, she looked at me like just to check and said, "Odu." And I said yes, and then she just sang the Ichik Dana, Pichik Dana, Dane Upar Dana. And it was my second week in Israel, and I was at such a loss because for 2 days I couldn't even buy dairy product because there is no English translation even. It's such a Hebrew nation. And now I meet suddenly a woman, 60 years old, singing a song in a language that I understand. And that was it. She couldn't speak a word English, and I was clueless about Hebrew expressions much. Anyway, the conversation ended. My curiosity is to ask you this. What popularized this mass cinema of 60s and 70s
Yes.
in Israel? If you can briefly share that narrative about it.
Yes. Okay. Indeed, Hindi popular cinema was distributed in Israel during the late 50s, 60s until the mid 70s, mainly in local cinemas, and as part of a cultural offer that included also Turkish melodramas, Egyptian, and sometimes Iranian, okay? All addressed middle, lower classes, okay? And well, I have a whole lecture about why Shri Charsobis was so conspicuous, but I won't do that now. We don't have the time.
But it was almost kind of a social protest against
Absolutely, I agree. And this kind of cinema declined in the mid 70s with the rise of power of the Israeli right, and with the change within the distribution system to big distributors who owned also the cinema halls. So small distributors, small film distributors could not work on this thing. And then we switched into, the 80s, the VHS revolution, and the 90s, the DVD revolutions. So Indian communities all received their own materials. I remember I got the Hindi films even before they were released in India. Of course, in pirate cassettes and without translation.
I hope
but
I
the
was not
community
being recorded.
No, she's off the record. She's on the camera.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Okay, Arjun,
Yeah.
I think we should.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
quick one. When you mentioned motherland and fatherland, was this now? Presumably, this came up mostly after the state of Israel. Was this also? Is this also sort of a way for the Jewish community, minuscule that it is, of reaffirming its Indian identity, where it's and not being seen as the other land? Because whenever in a synagogue, whenever there's an Israeli visitor, they sing both the Hatikva and the Jana Gana Mana. At the end of the Indian national anthem, almost inevitably they end with Jai Hind. Has there been a sort
Never,
of a,
never ends with Jai Hind?
no, it does always.
It does, okay,
So
yes,
it's sort of
naturally.
Is this a reaffirmation that we want to be seen more as Indians without any doubt about?
Yeah, you have to understand that within the playground of Israeli identity politics, within the, well, I don't know, we cannot speak of, absolute terms, but within the divide, the basic divide between Jews of Western origins and Jews of Eastern origins, Indian Jews have one asset. They don't hail from Arab and Muslim countries, okay, that suffer from sort of a backward image. So being Indian, employing the prism of,
Very short. Sorry, no.
no, it's okay. So being Indian, in a way, releases them, or could be an effective track to release the Indian community from the image of the Mizrahi Jews. At the same time, it is a very powerful trajectory to be seen and heard. So this is not a one-dimensional answer, okay?
Okay, very, very short.
Very
Yeah.
One last question. Is there any depiction of the relations between the Bene Israel and the Baghdadi Jews in,
No.
in Bombay?
No.
And with Muslims?
Certainly not.
Muslims, not as far as I know. I would die to find something.
So at that note, thank you so much. It was a very, very stimulating talk and discussion afterwards. And my pleasure is getting double to invite my friend Dani, Professor Daniel Rave from Tel Aviv University, to speak on between South Asia and West Asia.
Thank you.
And
Just obvious, we moved to Octopus in 1983. What?
half Waseko.
Yeah. Yesterday, I slept most of the day yesterday because I came from Israel just in the morning. But I attended the inaugural session and I listened to Shashi was speaking about the formation of the Israel-Indian relationship. I don't know if you spoke about it later on, but no one mentioned the tennis match. I mean, it all started, he was speaking about Rajiv Gandhi and his talks in America, etc. But no one mentioned the 1987 tennis match between Israel and India. Israel, as in other fields, thought of itself as extremely good at the time. We had two tennis players, Shlomo Glickstein and Amos Mansdorf. Both of them were 20 or 30 in the world. Vijay Amritraj was 33 or 34, quite an old age for a tennis player. And they ranked very low, 100 something in the world. The problem was that the Israeli team did not watch Octopussy and did not know that they didn't know about Agent Vijay. I don't know if you have seen the movie, the James Bond movie. It was the quarterfinal of 1987 Davis match. I don't know if you are aware of the result. The result was, for India, Ramesh Krishnan played and Vijay Amritraj. For Israel, Mansdorf and Glickstein. It was 4-0 to India in Delhi. I don't know why 4. I thought that it's the best of 5 and you stop after 3. It was 3-0 to India. And on that year, India went on in the semifinals. India beat Australia in the White City Stadium in Sydney. I found yesterday in the internet. And in the finals, it was Sweden versus India. It's 3-0 to Sweden. I'm sorry to say. So this is my memory. I came to India for the first time in '88, before the official relationship between India and Israel. I won't tell you exactly how. It has to do with a love affair of an Israeli travel agent and an Indian official at the embassy in London. So I wrote a short paper called Between South Asia and West Asia. My paper is about dialogue. It's about dialogue and translation. There aren't many Israelis here, but I'm not sure that Israelis would think of themselves as West Asians. Usually in the Indian news, the news about Israel come under the sector of news from West Asia. So my paper is divided to 3 pieces. Maybe I won't read to you everything because the time is short. It's a 3-piece jigsaw puzzle. So I hope that you'll see a picture will come out of this simple, only 3-piece jigsaw puzzle. So I wrote, everybody today speaks about dialogue. Everyone aspires to be in a dialogue, or at least this is what everyone says. Dialogue between friends, enemies, states, religions, East and West, North and South. Everyone speaks of the necessity of a dialogue, but very few engage in a dialogue, since dialogue is not an easy undertaking. To be in a dialogue is to see the other, which is a difficult challenge, as one usually concentrates on oneself and is used to thinking in terms of I and mine. Here Bhagavad Gita 271 comes to mind. I quote and translate, having abandoned all his desires, roaming about with without mine and without I, nirmamo, nir ahankaraha, one approaches the sublime, sa shantim adi gachati. The Bhagavad Gita itself is a dialogue, one of the most famous dialogues ever composed. The shloka quoted here prescribes the yogic path to the sublime, shanti, which interestingly is almost a word in Hebrew nowadays. However, the same procedure, namely suspending not one's desires but the I and my, can also be taken as a path toward you, the sublime you, as the antonym of Sartre's famous no-exit statement, hell is other people. Vrinda Dalmia, an interesting Indian scholar, speaks of this selflessness in terms of care. Her argument is that, I quote, the heart of the cognitive moment lies in selflessness, what is sometimes termed objectivity, she writes, where we, along with our biases and expectations, recede so that the object of knowledge can present itself. Can you hear? This is to say that Dalmia notices the same moment of the self from foreground to background, both in the cognitive moment and in the act of reaching out to the other, which she refers to as care. Both entail, she says, a backgrounding of the subject to create a space for the other, be it another person or the object of knowledge. The same point about knowledge as care and care as consisting of noetic dimension is also raised by Ben Okri, the Nigerian poet and novelist. In a short essay titled Hospitality, he writes, there is also intellectual hospitality. the hospitality to ideas, to dreams, to ways of seeing, to perception, to cultures. We will call this invisible hospitality. This is the most important hospitality of all, and it includes all other hospitalities. Dalmia's attempt in my reading is to reveal, or even to restore, the ethical foundation of every epistemological episode. Her epistemo-ethical ideal is not unrelated to the picture of dialogue to be sketched here as I move on. Moreover, Dalmia's argument as far as the cognitive moment is concerned sits well with the picture of consciousness as depicted by Patanjali of the Yoga Sutra, a philosopher of mind, among other things, who thought and wrote sometime around the 2nd or 3rd century CE. In his discussion of the object-centered meditation, which paves the way to objectless meditation, he writes in Yoga Sutra 143 that during this stage of meditation, meditation on an object, now I'm again quoting and translating, consciousness is as if emptied, shunya eva. This is for Hiraman, the Sanskrit phrases. Consciousness is as if emptied of its subjective nature, and the object of meditation alone shines forth. Like in Dalmia, one's subjectivity recedes, as it were, to clear a space for the other, object in Patanjali's case, or another subject, the you, that care ethics speaks of. However, dialogue is not just about seeing the other, but also about seeing through the other's eyes, even if just for an instance. This is to say that for the sake of a dialogue, not the usual pseudo-dialogue or non-dialogue in the name of dialogue, one has to leave his body and to enter the body or the head or the mind of the other. Take, for example, Wes Anderson's movie Darjeeling Limited, 2007. Take, for example, Wes Anderson. Yes. So this is a slide from Wes Anderson's movie. Yeah, can you switch to the next one? Yes, no, yes. Let's stop here with this slide. So take, for example, Wes Anderson's movie Darjeeling Limited. I don't know if the Indian friends here saw the movie. What? These are neither. So the story tells the story of 3 American brothers who traveled to India after their father's death, following the Oriental fantasy in search of themselves. One of them, Peter, played by Adrian Brody, the middle one in this slide, wears heavy glasses. You can see him with heavy glasses. But whenever he wants to see something, he has to take them off. He puts the glasses, but whenever he wants to see, he takes the glasses off. These are his father's glasses, with his prescription. Peter tries to understand his dead father, to see through his eyes, through his glasses. These glasses, as a metaphor, express the impossible desire to see through the eyes of the other. Only a dialogue, I'm writing, only a dialogue is of the capacity of making the impossible possible. Segment 2. Second piece of my jigsaw puzzle, to highlight the possibilities and impossibilities of a dialogue, and to bring into the picture the notion of translation, which is essential in every dialogue, even within one and the same language. Meaning that now that I speak to you in English, you still translate my words into your own frames, your own understanding. So to speak about dialogue and language, I wish to read to you a few paragraphs from a wonderful novel, Vikram Chandra's Red Earth and Pouring Rain from 1987. Can you go down one more? Yeah. This is the cover of the book, Red Earth and Pouring Rain. Ronnie and I interviewed him in front of live audience years ago when the book was published and he came to Israel. So I'm reading to you just a few paragraphs. In the middle more or less in the middle, page 271 of the novel, there's a dialogue between a sadhu and a wandering monk, a wandering ascetic, between a sadhu and Alexander the Great, Sikandar, who came to India, who invaded India, as you might know. I mean, the Indian people sitting here, of course, know in the 3rd century BC. So Vikram Chandra, a translated man himself, translated man, it's a phrase by Salman Rushdie. So Vikram Chandra, who lives partly in Bombay, partly in America, imagines this, what could the dialogue been like? I mean, there's a historical or semi-historical, and don't catch me on these phrases, historical and semi-historical, anecdote about Sikandar, Alexander the Great, coming to India and meeting naked men, naked sadhus. So the imaginary dialogue starts like this. Actually, it's not a dialogue between Alexander and the sadhu, but between the translator of Alexander the Great and the sadhu. Did anyone read the novel, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, you did. So the translator says, I'm not telling you about the place of the dialogue of this dialogue in the novel. You have to read the novel. The translator says he wants to know. This is the beginning of the dialogue, or the non-dialogue, or the pseudo-dialogue. He wants to know why you're naked. He wants to know why you're naked. And the sadhu answers, ask him why he's wearing clothes. He wants to know why you're naked, ask him why he's wearing clothes. So if you allow me a short commentary between the lines of Vikram Chandra, so you understand that the sadhu answers a question with a question of his own. It's a question raised to answer another question. And also you understand that the sadhu refuses to accept the presupposition that thinks of 5 minutes. No, you'll have to extend by 1 or 2. He refuses to accept the presupposition that wearing clothes, means being cultured, etc. Translator, he says he's asking the questions here. Sadhu. Questions give birth only to other questions. Translator. He says people who get funny with him get executed. Sadhu. Why? Since Yoman is allotting me just 5 minutes, I hope that you understand the context of reading you these sentences. I'm trying to speak about comparative philosophy. What? We are with me. I'm trying to speak about comparative philosophy as a dialogic undertaking, as something which is not based on standards of only one side. I would have read to you more. The interesting thing about this dialogue is that the sadhu is not afraid of Sikandar. And the translator at some point tells him, do you want me to tell him that? He calls Sikandar a Maha-idiot, which is a wonderful expression in English, because it's English Sanskrit, it's a fusion expression. Maha-idiot, which plays on the word Maharaja and on the great, Alexander the Great. And then the translator says, do you want me to tell him that? Sikandar this is not translation of Sikandar. So two parallel dialogues begin at the same time. And then, since the sadhu is not afraid of dying, he's not afraid of the threats of the emperor, at some point the emperor is impressed and he wants to know, why aren't you afraid of dying? And then the sadhu says, that would be silly. It would be silly to be afraid of death. If you are aware of the notion of abhinivesha in yoga philosophy, you know that fear of death is one of the obstacles for the yogi. But the translator says, he says, you should tell him exactly what mystic path you followed to reach this sublime state of indifference to death. And he wishes you would stop asking questions. Really, this is incredible. I think you've got him hooked. And the sadhu says, mystic path? And the translator says, mystic path, literal translation. Now, I don't know if you ever, I just said that we are translating all the time. And now I wanted to say, I don't know if you ever translated anything, but if you tried to translate, especially classical texts from far away languages, Sanskrit is far away, not only for an Israeli like me, even I guess for you, Indians living in Delhi today, Sanskrit is far in time, far in many aspects. So if you try to translate, sometimes you simply don't know what Patanjali or Nagarjuna or Shankar really wanted to say, and you rely on commentaries. But when you don't, and sometimes even the commentaries are not enough. And the last resort of the translator, I can tell you as a translator myself, is always the literal translation. When you have no clue what happens in the source text, you just translate literally. The short dialogue between Sikandar and the translator ends with Sikandar ordering his chroniclers to erase the dialogue from the protocol. So dialogue is not really taking place here. So now I should have something like a minute or so. So I'm jumping to my third segment, my third piece, and I'll read to you even just a few lines from this piece. I was planning to tell you what we're doing in Tel Aviv University in Indian philosophy, but I won't do it because the time is so short. But in the round table, okay. But I just want to come to my last. Let me skip and come to my last paragraph here. I'm writing, however, you don't know however what, because I skipped the previous paragraphs. However, and this is the crux of my talk here today, Indian philosophy, nowadays, today, not just in Tel Aviv University, is under threat by two different forces. Indian philosophy is under threat by two different forces. First, I feel that there is less and less openness and interest among Western thinkers in Indian philosophy. I'm telling you something quite sad. So there is less and less openness. We are no longer in the 60s. Among Western thinkers in Indian philosophy, this is certainly the case in my department in Tel Aviv. For some reason, the Eurocentric approach prevails. This is the place to say that, as far as I know, Indian philosophy is taught in the West, in departments of philosophy, only in Tel Aviv University, the University of Hawaii, and the University of Leeds in the UK. Otherwise, it is affiliated to departments of religion studies and regional studies, namely Asian studies. Even in India, many today think that Indian philosophy is not really philosophy. This is coming from an experience of spending a sabbatical in JNU recently. It's not really philosophy, and it is in fact religion under disguise. Second, the other great threat on Indian philosophy is New Age, which is a very strong vector in in Western lifestyles, imitated in contemporary India. So actually in Western and Indian lifestyles, and which often appropriates the name Indian philosophy to itself, thus giving very bad reputation to Indian philosophy as a serious discipline. I visited a bookstore in Amsterdam lately, and under Indian philosophy, and I guess the same experience can be in bookstores in Delhi. Under Indian philosophy, I found books by Krishnamurti, Jiddu Krishnamurti, Osho, and the Dalai Lama. This is perhaps the reason that Western philosophers do not take it seriously. The word Buddhism is identified today with the Dalai Lama's big smile in crimson robes, not with rigorous analytic argumentation. The word yoga is identified with everything except deep thinking about the burning questions of identity and identification, borders and border crossing, different types and layers of knowledge, time and temporality, language as world making. All these themes I'm putting under the title of yoga, very unlike the reputation of the word yoga. And I'm closing with a sentence which says, between the cold shoulder of Western philosophers and the bear hug of New Age, in brackets I wrote, I haven't said a word about the cynical politicization of classical texts and thinkers in India today. Let's not give up on Indian philosophy. Between the cold shoulder of Western philosophers and the bear hug of New Age, let us not give up on Indian philosophy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dani, for this very intimidating and extremely, and I mean intimidating in a very positive sense, if you know. This is what it's a brilliant talk. As I said, I can go on and on asking questions and having a real dialogue, not but I would rather want our friends to ask questions. So the floor is open, please.
You don't know what to say about the jigsaw puzzle with the Gita, the Yoga Sutra, care ethics, politics.
Yes, thank you. I'm very glad.
I wonder what attracts Israelis in such large numbers to Indian philosophy. Because
Large
large numbers.
You mean the New Age philosophy?
No,
Well,
no, no.
I wouldn't be able to go into these distinctions, but
But
I saw this that Indian philosophy was perhaps one of the most popular subjects at Tel Aviv University.
Yeah,
When I was there.
This is because of me.
yeah.
I'm joking.
Undoubtedly. I'm talking of the academic year 2006-2007 when I was a visiting fellow there.
Yeah.
So, in comparison to other Eastern philosophies, why are the Israelis more interested in Indian philosophy?
I don't really know what to answer. I'm not sure that Indian philosophy is more popular, for example, than Taoist philosophy or Zen Buddhism, etc. I also doubt, just like Herman, you use the phrase large numbers. It's true that many students come to introductory courses in Indian philosophy, but this has to do, I'm not sure that it has to do with Indian philosophy as much as it has to do with the fact that they visit India, you know about the people sitting here probably know about the ashram system, the stages of life in classical Indian philosophy. So in contemporary Israel, we also have ashramas. So we start with brahmacharya, with schooling, followed by an army service, by military service, which is compulsory, you might know. And then I'm talking seriously, the third ashram, the equivalent of vanaprastha, would be to have a year off before you start with a heavy duty life full of expectations. As Professor Sesser told me today in the car, his own expectations of his son. So you are allowed few months to travel to India. So India, in this respect, is already part of the contemporary Indian Israeli geography. I think that several places in India, like Varanasi, Dharamshala, Pushkar, are better known to Israelis than remote towns in Israel themselves. I must admit that I visited Varanasi many times. I hardly visited the remote towns in my own country at all. So this gap year after the army and the visit to India is an interesting topic in itself, which of course I know nothing about, because it has to do with Israeli society. It's a topic for research in Israeli sociology. Why India? There are reasons why India, maybe economic reasons why India, and the sense of freedom that will be taken from these young kids when they go back to, quote unquote, the real life very soon, next October, when the first semester begins. And many of them, as a matter of nostalgia, come to something which I speak of, or Ronnie speaks of, or any of us. So I'm not sure that the presupposition that it really captures the Israeli mind is correct.
Yeah, and I speak as a non-specialist. It's true that, of course, yesterday Dr. Shashi Tharoor was lamenting the fact that perhaps the ambassador in both countries should try and encourage more tourists to come. The only problem that I see is that these Israeli tourists are what we call the budget tourists. So they really don't contribute much to what Indians expect. So they can live happily in cheap hotels and but also that's why they can easily melt within the country that we have. But yes, Dali is right that there is not much engagement. I can't think of many in the last 50 years, 2 or 3 perhaps serious scholars who have engaged with Indian philosophy the way we want to, in analytical philosophy, epistemology, even horrible taste, you know. So you
For
have the
classicists.
Yeah. So for Buddhism, New Age, Tantra, and something more perhaps, and that's how it is. Yes.
I just want one more sentence to one more sentence to
Yeah.
Navraj. What caught me in Indian philosophy is the rigorousness of classical Indian philosophy and also contemporary philosophers
Yeah.
like Krishna Chandra Bhattacharya, Daya Krishna.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know, I mean, the people sitting here, that the classical Indian philosophy is written in a dialogic form. The philosopher, the Siddhantin, has to write the role of the Purvapakshin. He has to write his own opponent in the best way that he can. It's like playing chess against yourself. You have to play as good with the black pieces as you play with the white pieces. Otherwise, there is no game. And what caught me in Indian philosophy is really the rigorousness of the philosophizing. Nothing to do with the masalas, the colors, the agarbati, vagara vagara.
Yes. Very very quickly. Yes.
It's a very, very short question, just as all my other questions have been. So,
But the answers have been pretty long. The answers.
Yes, well, I know of Professor Itma Theodore at Haifa University, who is deep into Gandhian philosophy and is aware of how Gandhi draws heavily from Indian philosophy, and he has also been thinking as to how the Arab-Israel conflict, the resolution of the Arab-Israel conflict, possible resolution of the Arab-Israel conflict could benefit from Gandhian ethics and philosophy. Has there been any other attempt in Israeli society to draw from Indian philosophy for the sake of the resolution of the conflict with the Arabs?
Yeah.
And do you think that that attempt has not been utopian in nature?
Unless you consider David Shulman and his student as philosophers.
So Navraj's questions are short, but very penetrating. Again, you're asking me about something which is not exactly in my field of scholarship. So my answer would be more a matter of impression. I mean, paradoxically, my field of scholarship is Indian philosophy, and you're asking me about Israeli sociology. The idea is great to adopt Gandhian insights for the sake of a possible resolution of the never-ending Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I'm not sure that Gandhi was taken seriously in Israel. Itamar Theodore, a good friend of ours, is not a public figure in the country. I don't know if you're aware of the correspondence between Martin Buber and Judah Leib Magnus. Both of them wrote very extremely interesting letters to Gandhi. I'm talking about 1939. Maybe you heard of Buber's letter, but Magnus, I don't know if you have even heard of Magnus. Did you hear of Magnus?
Yes, we are aware.
Magnus was literally deleted, suppressed, I think, from contemporary Israeli history because of his opinions, which nowadays are considered leftist. He was against the famous two states for two peoples program. He was interested in one multicultural state, and you should read the letters to Gandhi. They wrote to Gandhi. They were debating Gandhi. Gandhi, as you know, wrote in the Harijan that he's with all his sympathy to the Jews, especially under the Nazi regime. He wrote it just after the Leil Abdollah, the Crystal Night in '38. Palestine belongs to the Palestinians. Shashi Taru mentioned it yesterday.
Yeah.
Just like England to the British, etc. And Buber and Magnus, two eminent Israeli intellectuals, wrote very harshly to him. And the letters are today open in the internet, in Google. It's interesting that they are debating philosophically. They are debating the universality of the notion of Ahimsa, of non-violence. Both of them say, each of them uses, interestingly, a different argument. Buber says, yes, Ahimsa is a great idea in 99% of the cases. The Nazis are the 1% left. And Magnus says something totally, you should read Magnus if you're interested in Judaism. Magnus says in order to use Ahimsa as a useful tool, as a weapon, so to say, quote unquote, Ahimsaic weapon, you should be indifferent to death. And the Jews are, and he tells Gandhi, you are indifferent to death, you are fasting to death. But Judaism is not indifferent to death, it celebrates life. I think it's an interesting argument. Gandhi never received the letters, they were never filed in Sabarmati. He never answered the letters. This would be my last sentence because Michal turn is coming. One second, Gandhi's grandson, which I don't know if you're aware of his work, Ramchandra Gandhi, Ramu Gandhi, wrote a long book titled I Am Thou, which he plays with Buber's famous title. In I Am Thou, Ramchandra Gandhi answers the unanswered letter by Buber. Very interesting.
Thank you, Dani. And very lastly, Rani wants to come in for something.
Yes.
And yeah.
Thank you. It will be quick. I would like to give a comment on the sociological aspect and inform you that yes, Gandhian philosophy is somehow present within Israeli contemporary political scene in protest against the land disputes in Bedouin, that is tribal societies' lands, as well as in some disputes over Palestinian lands. There are non-violent protests that do quote Gandhi as a source of inspiration. But I would say that this has to be taken with a pinch of salt, as Gandhi is indeed quoted, but only only as a slogan, only
It's
as
like wearing a Che Guevara T-shirt in
That's
a
right.
demonstration. It's not that they know something about Che Guevara.
exactly. I mean, Gandhian philosophy has deep connections with Vedanta, has deep connections with some aspects of yoga philosophy. Jainism, okay. So this is absolutely unknown only in the Israeli context. So this is, quite a void